All right, welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors. I'm Corey Janoff, joined as always by Rachelle Vanderzanden.
Yep. Thanks for being here.
Yep, yep. So this is our first recording of 2026, although you'll probably hear this in late January. But new year, I thought we'd start it off with some fun. We've talked before about how comparisons can get you into trouble and how reality minus expectations is a good formula to see what your satisfaction level will be. If reality is greater, or better than what you expect, you're probably pretty happy. If reality isn't as good as what you were expecting, then you'll probably be disappointed. And that could go for anything: job satisfaction, pay raises, children, you name it, vacation. Yeah, a good way to try and be happy is temper those expectations and and maybe I don't want to say settle for less, but if
Be happy with life.
be content with what you got,
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
know. There's a really good parable that most of you've probably heard. The two hikers come across a bear on a trail, and one hiker starts putting on running shoes, and his friend asks, "Why are you putting on running shoes? You can't outrun a bear." And the man replies, "I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you." And as humans, especially as Americans, from an early age, we've been conditioned to try and run faster than our peers. How we do relative to others matters more than how we do on an absolute basis. You know, get good grades, better than your classmates, better than average. Get into a good college, better than most of your high school peers. Get a good job, better than your college buddies, or get into a better med school or more preferable residency program, a better specialty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Make more money than your friends or colleagues. Have more saved up for retirement. Be able to retire sooner. It's all done on a relative basis, and which can be good in some ways, but also has some downsides. I think sports, perfect analogy here. As long as you score more than the other team, you win. Doesn't matter what the point total is, as long as it's more than your opponent or less in golf. You're playing a basketball game. Doesn't matter if you score 80, 100, 140, as long as it's at least one more than whoever you're playing against. That's all that really matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, but obviously in life it can be a little different. Like obviously everyone has different values, so it's hard to benchmark yourself against other people when what matters to them is not necessarily what matters to you and things like that. I think there's another good example where Harvard did a study, and it just tells you a little bit about how our brains work and how we are. I don't know if it's like societal pressures that are hardwiring it to us or hardwiring us to think like this, or if it's just kind of human nature to a certain extent. But they do some studies basically asking people like, okay, what about this scenario? What about this scenario? So they asked people to compare a couple of different options of salaries. And it turned out that how much you make relative to your co-workers matters more to you than how much you make sometimes in general. So they said, your first option is you can earn $50,000 and all of your coworkers will earn $25,000. So you're basically earning twice as much as your coworkers. Or option two is you can earn $100,000, twice as much as in option one, but all of your coworkers earn $250,000. And the majority of people in that scenario, in that study, would prefer to earn 50,000 if everyone else is only making 25 as compared to like, making significantly less than your coworkers. And I mean, if I put myself in that situation, I assume that if I'm making 100,000 and everyone else is making 250, that it's because they're all dudes, but maybe that's not right. But I think like how much you feel valued may matter to you more than how much money you're actually making, which is really interesting. And I think there's a lot of different things that show that, like middle class life in the 50s is probably the equivalent of what like poverty lifestyle is right now. And it's just something that is constantly changing and evolving over time, like what our expectations of like how we should be living and things like that. So I don't know, like obviously it's hard. You don't want to be sucked into this, but it's something that everyone gets sucked into.
Yeah, I think we talked. number of episodes back about, I forget what the subject was, but those Levitt towns in the 50s suburban expansion and how, it was a great life. You had a 700 square foot home, six kids, and no air conditioning, no garage, no covered porch, um, one car for the family. Your vacation was drive to the lake or to the shore or beach or whatever you call it, wherever you live. And then people were happy and content. But today, living, six-person family in a 700 square foot two-bedroom home with one bathroom and no air conditioning. I mean, that's like an upgrade from the projects, but not much. You're a poor person in that scenario, by today's standards. So it's all relative, but a person that's living in, a lower middle class lifestyle today would, compared to someone in the 50s, that's like phenomenal. They're upper class, the
Mhm.
standard of living that they have. So, people would rather be the richest poor person than the poorest rich person when we're talking relatively speaking. Like that Harvard study was a perfect example. We'd rather do better than our peers, even if on an absolute basis we're worse off than if we took double the salary, but everyone around us was making more. Um, if you and all your friends are on food stamps, but you can afford all of life's necessities while your friends struggle to pay the utility bills, you think you're doing pretty well. But if you're worth $1 billion and all the friends you hang out with are worth 5 to 10 billion dollars, and they have nicer cars, more homes, bigger homes, nicer yachts, private jets, make larger donations to charities than you do. Like you might feel a little embarrassed when you host the dinner party and you're not able to one up them like they can to you. So it's all relative, and this can lead, when it comes to personal finances, it can make it challenging to feel satisfied and be happy, if we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. So
Yep.
keeping
I
up
think,
with, go ahead, Rachelle.
yeah, the whole keeping up with the Joneses thing is kind of like where we've talked about this before too. But I think it's really interesting because it used to be that the Joneses were your neighbors, like your actual neighbors, your friends, your family, like people like that. But now your comparison group is not people you know necessarily, like that's part of it, but it's also everyone that you see and follow online. Like if you're on social media, it's like, oh, all the influencers that you follow, all of those kinds of things too. And there's just so much more information out there, and people are really publishing only the best of the best, right? They're not posting online about how their vacation went horribly wrong because everyone cried the whole time. And like, Susie got bitten by a jellyfish or like whatever. Maybe that's on there, but like we're painting a very rosy picture on the internet. And so even our comparisons are off. They're not accurate. Like we don't really know what we're looking at and what people's lives are like and how much money they actually have. So it makes it even more challenging when you're trying to feel like your life in comparison to other people's is enough. Like maybe it doesn't feel like it's enough because you see all of this and because your expectation of what their life is like is different than what it actually is.
And it's ironic because we know that to be true. We know
Yeah,
everyone's just posting the highlight reel, but our
it doesn't
brains,
matter. It
it's
doesn't
still
compute, right?
subconsciously, yeah, we're like, oh man, they can take their kids to a restaurant and their kids actually sit quietly and eat. But I feel like I'd have to put my kids in a straitjacket and duct tape their mouth shut in order for them to sit quietly in public, which I know is frowned upon. So we just don't go to restaurants with our children as a result.
Or you give
So
them an iPad, which is also very frowned upon.
yeah, but everyone does it. Like you go to any restaurant and they got kids there, the kids are sitting there on iPads, and
No, I just let my
um,
kid run wild. She doesn't have an iPad, but
there we
yeah,
go.
I guess she's 10 now, but she's still we go places where she can be cray. Like,
Yeah, yeah. You go to the permissible run wild
yeah,
establishments. So a lot of outdoor
exactly.
breweries and
Yes.
pizza
Outdoor,
places.
yeah,
So
all the time.
there's one, Good Life. This was probably like 6 months ago now, or maybe even longer. They built a playground in their back
Hmm.
lawn of the
Hmm.
the brewery. So Like that's a good spot to go with
Those are
kids.
my
So,
favorite kind of spaces, especially
yeah.
when there's outdoor space,
The
because I think
breweries
it
have
just,
it figured out for the family
yep,
friendly, dog friendly
yep,
environment.
yep, absolutely. Okay, so a little bit off topic there, but still, I mean, the point holds that we do not even make accurate comparisons anymore. Like it's just really hard to do in the age of the internet. So give yourself a pat on the back for whatever it is that you're doing for your financial security, because that's the kind of stuff that you don't see on the internet generally. Like, you're not saying like, oh, how prepared are we for college? How prepared are we for retirement? Like, are we properly insured? No, like none of that is generally on there unless you're in a very, very specific little niche space of the internet, which is not very exciting, honestly.
Yeah, not a lot of
Neither are.
people are bragging about how they completed a life insurance needs calculator and purchased an adequate amount of life insurance for their family based on their projections. Like that's it's not getting clicks.
Nope.
Um,
I mean, our podcast is not that popular, Corey.
I know. We're not getting called to give quotes for mainstream media and yeah, anyways, so it is but the people that do, our loyal followers and listeners, we do appreciate
Mhm.
you, and
Of
um
course.
we're happy to hopefully add value to your lives on a bi-weekly basis. um but yeah, where are we going? So like, yeah, the internet has like screwed everything up in our heads. And we know this. But like before, your comparison group was your immediate circle. Like the news was your local community. Like people who lived in New York didn't know or care what people in Dallas were doing or what was happening to them. I mean, maybe if there was something really crazy, it would make headlines like riots in the street level, but we didn't know what they were thinking or how they were acting or what was important to them. And now, like, it seems like political discord is at an all-time high today. I would argue people have had differing opinions since the beginning of time. We just didn't really hear from the other side, whatever side you're on, because like they weren't in your circle. They were in a different part of the country and you didn't really know they existed. I mean, you knew they existed, but you didn't, they were just like some imaginary thing over there. Now you can hear everyone's voice at any point in time on any device in your pocket, and it can somehow get to people. Um, with our investments and, kind of a long roundabout way to ultimately get to the financial planning side of it. We've talked a little bit, keeping up with the Joneses. They got the nice car. You're going to feel like you want a nice car too. I think there's another study that showed if your neighbor, not you, but if your neighbor won the lottery, you were, I think, 5 times more likely to go bankrupt than if your neighbor didn't win the lottery, just because of like, hey, you feel compelled to increase your spending. Um,
That's
5
sad.
times, like let's say the odds are 1%. All right, now you're at 5%, still
Yeah.
statistically unlikely, but a much
But
greater
very
probability.
statistically significant.
Yes,
Yeah.
statistically significant. So like we whether we want to or not, we all do it. We all look at what others are doing around us and compare ourselves. And when it comes to our personal finances, our investments, this can be problematic because not everyone is necessarily playing the same game as you. Their goals and objectives might be different than yours. Going back to the income analogy, like would you rather your portfolio grow by 15% this year, but the quote unquote stock market grows by 25%? Or would you rather your portfolio go down by 5% and the stock market goes down by 15%? So one scenario, you underperformed by 10%, but you still had a great year. Another, you outperformed by 10%, which is fantastic, but you still lost money. Um, and that's kind of a rhetorical question, hypothetical. You don't really need to think too hard about it. On an absolute basis, everyone should want the positive growth, despite underperforming. But relatively speaking, yeah, that absolute or the outperformance is amazing. But I think a good follow-up question you should be asking is like, all right, if I'm underperforming in the up years, can I also outperform in the down years and collar your return. So you're not going to be up as much, but you're also not going to be down as much. And that's exactly from a financial planning perspective why you typically go from more aggressive to more conservative as you progress through life. When you're early and young, if you have a $10,000 portfolio because you're just starting out, well, a 50% loss isn't changing your outlook. Like it's not it's not changing your probability of being able to retire 30 years later. Like 5,000 versus 10,000 not moving the needle. But if you've got a $5 million portfolio, yeah, a 50% decline would be pretty significant and set you back quite a bit from retirement, especially if you're in your 50s. So
Mhm.
that's where you typically want to take a little less risk and you're okay with not seeing as much growth in the up years in exchange for hopefully not seeing as much loss in the down years. Um, where else do we want to go with this? Comparing to
Yeah.
benchmarks.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to avoid. So when we create these portfolios that potentially like underperform on the upside, like you maybe don't get as much of a positive return when the market's up, and then outperform on the downside where, maybe it's not down as much as it could be when the stock market is down. Usually that means that we have a pretty well diversified portfolio. We don't just have the S&P 500. We have some bonds, we have some international things and stuff like that. So that's where we don't necessarily want to be comparing to like one benchmark like the S&P 500 because your portfolio is just not designed to do exactly what the benchmark is doing. It's designed to be a little bit more diversified and kind of avoid some of those big losses potentially. I'm
And
not avoid
diverse
entirely, but like just not.
mitigate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
Hmm.
diversification, I mean, it's like rule number one of investing,
Hmm.
be diversified. We've all heard it. We don't always understand exactly what it means or what's an appropriate way to do it for our circumstances, but we know we don't want to throw all our eggs in one basket. And 2025 was a perfect example of a year where diversification was beneficial. For the previous decade or so, it was large US company stocks that carried the weight of the entire market. If you weren't in large growth, large tech, like you were underperforming. S&P 500, especially, the tech stocks, the NASDAQ, those were the best performers. Last year, though, I mean, S&P did great. It was up, I think, close to 18%. NASDAQ was up like 14%. Small cap companies are up, I want to say 12, domestic small cap. Developed international, over 30%. Emerging markets, I think it was 34% in 2025. So, for the prior decade, being in international stocks was meant underperforming, but last year it benefited you. And you just never know what area is going to do well from one year to the next. There's so many variables at play. So by being diversified, you are guaranteed to never have the best performing portfolio because you can't. Like
Because
the
you
only way to have
average out everything that you have.
yeah, the
Yeah.
only way to have the best performing portfolio is to concentrate into the one thing that does the best. But by doing that, you run the risk of also having a horrible year. Because if you're in only one thing and that one thing is the worst performing thing, well, now you have the worst performing portfolio. So being diversified, you'll never have the best performing portfolio. You'll also never have the worst performing portfolio. You'll hopefully always have the thing or the sector that's doing the best and not be overly exposed to the thing or the sector that's doing the worst. And it'll hopefully smooth out the ride a little bit. You're not going to have, the big, gyrating swings. Hopefully, again, there's
As big. Yeah.
as big. There's like, scenarios like 2008, everything was down. Bonds kind of held their own for the most part. High yield struggled. 2022, stocks and bonds both were down double digits. One of the only years, I think one of 3 years on record that's ever happened. So it doesn't make you immune from declines. You will see declines, but it's going to smooth things out a little bit over time. Um, so yeah, be diversified. Don't compare to one thing. Like the S&P is a classic example. It's a great diversified index, roughly the 500 largest U.S. companies. The multinational companies, they have revenues from all across the globe. It's a very diversified index, but it's also only one thing. It's large US companies. It's ignoring small companies. It's ignoring bonds, treasuries, corporates, asset-backed securities, et cetera. It's ignoring international companies. There's a lot of different areas out there that can add value over time to a well-rounded portfolio.
Yep.
So what do we
Yeah.
do to try and be happy, avoid disappointment, live our
Yeah.
best
So
life?
obviously lots of different examples of how we can compare ourselves to other people. But what do we do to try to avoid that, or at least put that in context a little bit better? So I think the most important thing, and this is something we talk about all the time, is just to clearly identify your own goals and values. Like what's important to me? What am I trying to achieve here? And sometimes, a person may love fancy cars, and that's okay. Like if that's one of your goals and values, then you may have some more like showing of outward wealth that is obvious to other people. Maybe you really like vacations. Again, that might be something that's a little bit more showy, but maybe it's a much higher priority to you to have like no educational debt for your kids. That's not really a visible sign of wealth. Like no one really knows what's going on with your 529 accounts, probably, maybe a little bit, but not much. It's not something we sit around the dinner table and talk about a lot. Or maybe you want to retire at age 55 and you're focused on retirement savings. So whatever it is, like find the thing that matters to you and matters to your family and make sure that you are using your resources appropriately to kind of achieve those goals. Like everyone has limited resources to an extent. Most people that are listening here, you obviously have limited resources, or else you probably wouldn't have to pay attention to financial planning podcasts at all. But just kind of use your resources in a way that makes sense for your goals. And then recognize that some of these things are very visible and other things are not. So even though we shouldn't measure ourselves against other people, and that's what we're trying to talk about this whole time, there are some things you can consider when you start to do it that may make you feel a little bit better. So maybe your neighbor, like, I mean, they don't know how much is in your 529 accounts. They might not have anything in a 529 account or in college saving for their kids. Maybe that's not a priority for them. Maybe they have a nicer house or a nicer car. Maybe that's their priority, or maybe they haven't given it a lot of thought. Who knows? But we just don't know those things. And then, some of the other things are really visible, and that's not something that we can necessarily control with other people. But if that's not important to you, like the fancy car, like is that something you really care about? If so, cool. But if not, like you don't need as nice of a car as your neighbor, period. Like it may not be something that's really important to you. And if you can put it in that context where you're recognizing, like, I don't have that because I don't care about that, or that's not a really like high priority for me, then you can hopefully feel a little bit better about it.
And I think people think about you a lot less frequently and than you think about yourself and that you think they might think about you. Like we all do this. We go to a social function, have a conversation with someone, and then on the car ride home, we're like, "Hey, did I sound weird when I said this?" Or, "Hey, was that awkward when it's like, do you think I made them uncomfortable?" It's like, I don't think they're thinking about it at this point. They're asking the same questions like, "Hey, when I had this conversation with the other person, was that like," they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. And like with the fancy car, like why does anyone, well, not anymore. Why do most people have the fancy cars? You look at someone with a fancy car, you think, "Ooh, that would be cool for me to drive. I would feel really cool in that car." You don't think, "Oh, that person is really cool in that car." You don't think about them. You think how you would be in their shoes. Um, like that's more often than not what we do when we look at something cool, nice, fancy. Like when we see our friends on the vacation, it's, "Ooh, that would be fun for me to go on." Not like, "Oh, my friends are so cool. They have such a cool vacation." And sure, like, they're close friends. You're happy for them. You care about them, etc. But the random person on Instagram, like it's not, you're thinking how you would be in their shoes. So I think don't get the car because you want to impress others because they don't care about you. They're not thinking about you. And we don't have to try and keep up with our neighbors. Although I do have a fun story. I can't remember if I've told this before or not, but when my middle brother, when he first moved to the Bay Area, they live in a pretty nice neighborhood there, but they were renting a home. and he had his beat up Toyota Camry from college that he was still driving because he just doesn't care. He's not a car person. And he would park the Camry on the street because, again, he doesn't care. It's got dings. He loved it when they were living in Seattle because he could park it anywhere and didn't care if it got dinged up or bumped into or whatever. It was the perfect car to take places. So he parks it on the street because he doesn't care. And they had a Tesla that they would park in the garage. And he got an anonymous letter from one of the neighbors saying, like, hey, your eyesore of a vehicle is like bringing down our property values. Could you maybe put the Tesla in the driveway and your ugly Toyota in the garage? Because like we don't want to look at it. So yeah, maybe there are some people
That
that
care,
judge you based
that
on what
really
you
care.
have.
Yeah. So, practical tip, and maybe not very practical, but a little bit practical. If it's challenging to ignore the noise, maybe intentionally like live in a more modest neighborhood. Like obviously, like if you have kids, maybe the school district matters and you want to be comfortable in your home and all of that can lead to like a more expensive home and a nicer neighborhood and things like that. But if possible, if it's like doable, feasible for you and your family, if you can live in a more modest house in a more modest neighborhood, first, it'll bring down one of your largest expenses, probably, which is your housing payment. And second, you're probably going to feel pretty good compared to your neighbors. Like maybe your car is a little nicer because you can afford it because your house is more modest for your income. Maybe you can afford to go on more vacations because your house is more modest compared to your income. So that can be like a really, really, really good tool to kind of be in a good financial position and also be able to do a lot of those more fun things that you may or may not be interested in doing if it's something that's important to you. Yeah.
Yeah, one challenge there is for a lot of people right now, downsizing their home would increase their payment because
Yeah. Yeah, maybe not super feasible in this
yeah,
moment. But
but something to consider like for, future or if you're in training and looking to get into you're
or
making
just
that
buying your
transition.
first home,
Yeah, first time home
Yeah.
buyer, etc. Or if
Yeah.
you're renting, whatever. We've worked with lots of people all across the financial spectrum. Um, People that appear like they should have a lot of money, but they don't because they spend it all. And then other people who look like, hey, based on your income, it's, saving a lot. It's going to be a challenge, but somehow they save a ton and relative to their income, like they're doing fantastic. Um, so I don't know. We've kind of bounced around a lot today, but I think the summary, if there is any takeaway, it's hard, but try to ignore others. Don't pay attention to what's important to others and their values. If it's not important to you, you shouldn't be like, oh, I have to copy them because they're on a different trajectory. And that's fine. Like, be happy for them, support them, whatever. But if it's not important to you, don't pretend like it should be, or don't try to make it important. You want to really, align your goals and values with your spending. If we had a Venn diagram, one circle is spending, one circle is goals and values. In a perfect world, they're perfectly overlapped, and it's just one circle. Um, it's going to be hard to make it perfect, but the more we can align how we allocate our time, energy, money, attention, um, align it with our values, the happier we'll probably be in the long run. Much easier said than done, but
Just like everything, I feel like everything is easier said than done. But if you can take a little, shall we say, wisdom and ingrain it in your life and reflect on it once in a while, that might change a little bit of your brain chemistry.
yep.
And maybe it will be helpful, hopefully.
It doesn't have to be an overnight overhaul. Just,
Yeah,
every day, try to get 1% better. So
cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. If you
we'll
have any
see it
questions, you can email us. Maybe.
podcast at thefinitygroup.com.
Ooh,
We'll see you next time.
bye.